Finally, the time has come for me to show you the 3 most commonly used methods for dodging and burning. And of course, the most obvious choice to start with would be the method that uses the native dodge and burn tools found within Photoshop. So let's see how that works. If you go to your toolbars panel, if you click on this icon, you will throw open the tools that are bundled all together, and that will be the dodge tool, the burn tool, and the sponge tool. And you also can press the default keyboard shortcut, which is the letter O, and if you continue to press it, it will cycle to the rest of these tools, which are all bundled together, kind of like brush tool. Now, first thing I wanted to tell you is that the dodge tool pretty much does exactly what you would expect. It lightens part of the image. The burn tool does the exact opposite. It darkens part of the image. And the sponge tool, that's designed to, I guess, counteract the color shift that you might encounter when using these tools. And the way it works, it either desaturates or saturates part of the image where you painted. So let's see how they work. And also, before I start, I want to select them. And here in the tools bar options menu, you can see that we have some additional options. So let's go over them really quickly. Here you can choose your presets for your brush, or in this case for dodge and burn tools. Here you can choose your size, your hardness, just like you would with a brush, and you also can choose between different presets. You can load some of them from your hard drive, or you can save it once you have it ready for dodging and burning. This icon opens up the brush panel. This option is quite unique for dodging and burning tools, and it's the same if you're using dodge or burn tools. It allows you to target shadows, midtones, and highlights when dodging and burning. And also we have exposure. Now I'm not sure what the word exposure exactly here means, but I think it's the same as opacity. It could possibly mean that the exposure is pretty much the same as the slider found within Camera Raw, for instance, but I doubt it. I think it's just like using your opacity. This option is the airbrush mode. This protect tone option, that's kind of the new thing they introduced in, I believe, CS4 of Photoshop, and is designed to protect the tones and prevent potential color shifts when dodging and burning. And I think this sounds great, but it doesn't work quite like I would like it to work when using it on the actual image. This option here is for you if you're using your pressure sensitive tablet. If you have this on, it will allow you to use your pressure sensitive tablet to control the size of your brush, or in this case the dodge or the burn tools. Now let's see how they work. I have here a background that's filled with 50% gray or neutral gray. Now coincidentally is the same color that I'm using for the paste area right here outside the canvas, and the only way you can see where one stops the other begins is with this indication that the canvas has drop shadow effect applied to it. I don't think this is relevant, but just so you know what I'm using to demonstrate this. Now if I use my brush, or actually in this case the dodge tool, I'm going to do exactly what I would expect. I'm going to lighten parts of the image. Here's an interesting tip. If you use your Alt or Option key, you will on the fly switch between the dodge tool to the burn tool. So if I use my brush, the dodge tool, and I press my Alt key, I'm going to temporarily switch to the other one. So when I paint, I'm actually on the fly painting with the other one. And let me show you how this works. Now this is not visible on this image or this document which is filled with just one color, but you can still see some difference. If I switch to shadow and I paint, I get more subtle effect. Midtones, I get more stronger effect, and with highlights I'm getting even stronger, but not that much stronger effect. Now this really comes into play when you're working on an image. So let's see how that works when working on an image that I worked on in the previous video. Now remember, in the previous video I showed you exactly how I developed this from the raw file. In this video I decided not to use all the additional layers and adjustment settings, so what I did, I just flattened the image and opened it up as the new document, nothing more. So let's zoom to something like 50%, and I'm going to position myself over this area which represents her cheek. Now as you remember from the last video, I wanted to dodge this darker patch underneath her eye, and the same thing I'm going to try to do here. Now first of all, before I even start, you should know that these tools are designed to work on an image that's not transparent, on a layer that's not transparent. So in this case it works only on the image, either copy of the background layer or the background layer itself. So if I were to work now on the background layer, I would have to use my history palette to go back and forth. But as soon as I would save the file, I would lose all my history. Now in case I want to use it in a more, I guess, less destructive quote-unquote way, what I would do is I would copy the background by dragging into the new layers icon. Now when I work on the background, I can switch it on and off, and I can revert back to the original if I wanted to, even after I save the file. So most people, what they do is they copy the background layer and then they work on that area they want to work with dodge and burn tools. So let's see how they work. First of all, I'm going to have my protect tones activated. And just to give you a better demonstration, I'm going to call this protect tones. I'm going to create another copy. Control J or Command J will also copy the background layer. And I'm going to call this one without protect tones. So let's see how it works when we use the protect tones option. And like I said, this controls opacity. Now what I'm going to use here is the airbrush mode, but I don't have to. I'm just going to click on it anyway. And I'm going to reduce the exposure to something like 5%. Or better yet, I'm just going to click the 0.5. It's going to put my value for exposure to 5%. I'm going to increase my brush just a bit. And let me dodge this area. I'm going over this area using the 5% for exposure. It's set to midtones and has protect tones on. And I'm alt clicking now to switch to my burn tool, and that will allow me to get the counter effect if I wanted to darken or lighten an area. And okay, now let's work on this part here, because I think I went a bit too far on this area. Now let's see how that works. So this was before, this is after, before, after. Now let's switch to without protect tones to see how that works. I'm just gonna use the same settings except without protect tones, and I'm gonna dodge this area. I'm gonna darken this area, but not that much, just a tad bit. Also, something worth noting, when I'm switching back between dodge and burn, here's the problem, that when I'm holding my alt key, I'm switching to the burn tool, which is set to here for exposure is set to not 5% but 100%. So that's something I forgot to change. And also what I need to do is deactivate the protect tones when I'm working. That's something I forgot, and you shouldn't. Alright, I guess this is a bit too far, so I'm gonna burn some areas here. Now let's see how this works. This was protect tones on, this is not protect tones on. Now, interesting thing happened, exactly opposite of what I would expect. And to give you a better demonstration of how this works, let's get back to protect tones and switch it here as well. And now I'm going to go over an area which has more color on it. Let me find something that, here it is. No, I'm not going to touch that one, but this area could use some work. Now, this is not just a flat area like here, it has some more darker tones, and it also has some more saturation. So let's see how would I use this tool when it's protect tones activated. Now here's the problem that I'm seeing. What did happen here is it introduced some saturation. It should protect the tones, and it did, but with me dodging it, it also added some saturation. And if I use the other tool now, the burn tool, by holding down my Alt or Option key, I'm not going to change much. Now let's see how this works if I use without protect tones. It seems more like bleaching, but in this case I'm not introducing that additional saturation, which looks better in this case. Now here, on the other hand, it looks just a tad bit better when using protect tones. So anytime, I would suggest anytime you're working on with this tool on something that already has some saturation on it, like shadows or harsh transitions, use without protect tones. When you're working on a more flat area, such as maybe forehead or middle of the cheek, then protect tones has some certain values. Now let me show you something else. I'll activate the protect tones and I'll switch to the sponge tool, and I'll show you how it works. You have all the other options like you would in the previous tools, except you have flow option here instead of exposure, which acts pretty much similar to what opacity, but as we know, flow builds color or effect based on movement over the same area. We have our airbrushing mode, and we have here option to saturate to desaturate. Now this also works if you press the Alt key, just like you would with dodge and burn tools. Here when you press Alt key, it switches between saturation and desaturation of that area. Now here's an interesting thing, the vibrance. Before I go into what vibrance is, before I use it, let me show you what vibrance actually does. So I'll zoom my image back to 12%. I'll temporarily deactivate these two temporary, I would say, practice layers. I'm going to go to my adjustments. Now I have here adjustment called vibrance. This is pretty new to, I'm not sure if CS4 even has it, but it's a pretty new option for Photoshop. So if I choose that, I can see two sliders, saturation and vibrance. And the main difference is that vibrance is in a way more intelligent way to saturate or desaturate. Now it's not designed to replace saturation, it's designed to complement it. So let's see how that works. Actually, I think I can increase the size, my zoom size, to something like 50%, and let's see how it works. If I increase my, first of all, if I decrease the saturation, it completely turns the image into black and white. If I double click on the name, it switches to 0%. And you also have these scrubby sliders, which means that if you hover your mouse over a word, it turns into this little hand with two arrows, and if you click on the word you can move it left and right, and that will allow you to move the slider. Now first thing I wanted to show you is that if you increase the saturation to 100%, and this image is now heavily saturated, but amazingly there's still some details left. I guess the only place where we actually lost some detail is here. I mean, there is some detail left, but it's hanging for its dear life. Most images, when you increase saturation, you saturate the colors to the point that you're losing the detail underneath. So that's pretty much straightforward when using saturation. It acts on all colors the same way. It just saturates them in a completely the same way, the entire image. Now vibrance, on the other hand, let me see what happens if I increase it to 100 value. Unlike saturation, remember, which turned my image into Star Trek poster, vibrance kinda protects some of the skin tones. I definitely introduced some new colors, and I introduced saturation into areas which were lacking the saturation, while the areas that already were saturated were left mostly protected. And that's how vibrance works. It tries to figure out which areas are already saturated, that if you increase saturation some more you would lose details, and those areas are usually not affected by vibrance. And areas that don't have so much saturation, when you increase the vibrance slider, they add up some saturation to those areas. And the second thing, apparently, vibrance is written in a way that kind of tries to figure out what tones represent the skin tones, and then it tries to not overdo the skin tones. That's especially useful when you're working with portraits. So that's the difference between vibrance and saturation. let's get back to our images. Let's see now, when working with the sponge tool, we have this new option. I think this is new for CS4 as well. Before that, we only had saturation and desaturation. Now when I deactivate this and I try to paint and try to desaturate this, and let's put this to something really low, like 2% maybe. And let's use my pen. And I'm just gonna go over this area real quickly, but I guess my percentage was too low, so I'm gonna raise it to maybe not that high, maybe something like 5%. Let's see how that works. You can see that I'm actually pulling out some of the color which was introduced when I used the dodge tool with the protect tones on. And if I switch to alt tool, if I press my alt or my option key, I will temporarily switch between saturation and desaturation. I can bring back some of the saturation. In this case, it didn't work. Actually, it doesn't work. I'm not sure why. It should, when you click alt, it should switch between saturation and desaturation. But for reason unknown, it does not work right now. Anyway, so that's how you would use your sponge tool. Now let's see how this works. If I go back in history to the original position and I choose to switch to vibrance, it's more subtle effect, but it also darkens the area that I'm working on. And in case you're not sure why that is, let me show you. I'll just go back in history to this point, and let me get back to that example with the vibrance slider. Now, to show you just how this works, I'm gonna zoom fit to view to about 12%, and let's see what happens if I lower the saturation and increase the vibrance. Now, because I'm turning this image into black and white, you're not exactly seeing what I wanted you to see. But this also affects saturation, but because saturation is, when it's more saturated or less saturated, some color, it may give you an appearance that it's darker or lighter. And if I switch this vibrance layer to luminosity, which will only affect now the luminance value, not the color. Let me show you now before and after with these settings. I basically just introduce more brightness into the color which represents the background. But if I switch this, you can see what's happening. So it can also have effect on how bright your image is. That's why when I used it here with the vibrance on, it made this patch less saturated, but it also darkened it. That's something worth noting. Okay, I'm gonna delete these two test layers and let's get back to the original background layer. Now the second thing I wanted to show you, and let's switch to dodge tool for instance. Turn the protect tones on. Now let's work on this image for a moment and let me show you how would I use this, as I did in the previous movie, to fix some of the problems on this image. I'm gonna use that same technique that I showed you in the last movie. Remember that discouraging method, when you turn your image into something you don't want to work on. So if I lower my red slider, known as the masochist slider, you can see just how much work needs to be done on this image. And that's exactly what we're going to try to do, but not on the background layer. Instead, we're going to work on the copy of the background layer. So I'm going to Alt or Option key drag this to the new icon, which will allow me to rename it, and let's call it Dodge and Burn. And now I can collapse my adjustments palette because I'm not needing it at the moment. I'm going to switch to my dodge tool and I'm going to be working on the background copy, which we renamed to Dodge and Burn. And same as before in the last video, I'm going to try to fix this area. Protect tones is on. Now you can see just how much easier it is to fix an area and to see just how much, to gauge how much you need to dodge or burn, right? Because of that red slider. Now what I'm seeing here is this is a bit too much of a effect for me. I need a more subtle approach. So I'm gonna go to my brush panel and I'm gonna click on this transfer option. Because I'm using pen and tablet, I can now control the opacity, or in this case the flow, based on the pressure, and that will allow me to dodge and burn more subtly. And I'm just gonna go over these areas which I think would need some evening out, if you will. And this area here, this area here. Now I'm not gonna go over cheek area too much because I'm not sure what exactly am I supposed to be doing with it. If I see the image this is far zoomed in, it's hard to gauge just what exactly am I doing. Am I reshaping her cheek, or am I just fixing what needs to be fixed? So that's something you want to keep an eye on. And you also want to zoom in back and forth quite a bit when working with dodge and burn tools. Now this is an area that could definitely use some fixing, so I'm gonna lower my brush tool, or in this case the dodge tool, and since I'm using that pressure sensitive thing, I can also increase my exposure to about 10%, which will give me just about enough pressure with my pen and tablet and enough exposure setting to comfortably work on these areas. Now this could also be fixed. This is an area that I forgot, so it's because if I spend too much time on one area, I tend to not see areas needs dodging and burning. So one of the good methods to avoid this is to simply move around quite a bit, and I will basically recalibrate your eyes, and you will be able to see the parts that you missed. And also zoom back and forth quite often, and sometimes just make a break, go to the bathroom, grab something to eat or something like that, and when you go back to your image and try to dodge and burn then, or do any type of adjustment like color correction, your eyes would be much more objective, and it's much wiser to work that way, because in the long run it saves you from bad adjustments. If you're very skilled and your eyes are very trained, even then you can make mistakes, but it's not as common situation. But if you're a beginner, then I would definitely recommend that you make shorter breaks. I'm switching between dodge and burn tools using that Alt or Option key, remember? Okay, let's try to see now what have we accomplished. If I zoom back, oops, if I zoom back to this area, now I can see there's some area that needs dodging, burning, like this one. That's this area here, and maybe this one and this one. And now that I'm finished with this, actually I'm not, I'm just gonna go over this area here and maybe this area here, and you can see now that since I zoomed in back and forth, all of a sudden I'm seeing parts that I didn't see before. That was exactly the thing I was telling you about a minute ago. Okay. I think we're getting really close to fixing this area. Of course, this is not pixel level, this is just demonstrational purposes. Now let's zoom back. This was before, and this is after. Ooh, definitely. I have area here which I'm gonna fix. Also, yeah, all those things, making breaks and all that stuff, I forgot to say that you can deactivate the layer you're working on to just see the before and after. And if you do that, then it's even easier to spot what exactly you need to fix. Okay, now let's make an adjustment like so we can reshape that. We can reshape that. That would be cheek, I guess. Not sure how this area here is called. Alright, now let's take a look. Back to 25% and let's see before and after. This was before and this is after. Before, after. Before, after. Quite amazing difference. Let's see without the horrifying adjustment. Oh yeah, it's definitely moving along. If I wanted to, I could fix this area, and I think I will, but this time in normal mode. And you see, because I'm using the protect tones here, I'm not working on areas that have too much, I would say, too much of saturation, and that's why protect tones actually comes in handy. But if you're working on an area like this, or this area that has some saturation and harsh transitions, then you might want to deactivate it. Alright, now let's see what happened. Because we dodged this area, we actually lost some of the color. It wasn't there in the begin with, because if you deactivate this, you can see that it's just darker patch, so it seemed like it's more color there, but it wasn't. When we dodged that part, we just now made this almost bleached like area. To fix that, now we can use our sponge tool to saturate and make this maybe 10%. And I'm gonna just go over this area. And because we have some differences in the colors, like here's a redder, this part is more red, and this patch here is yellow, then this one is red. We can fix that in a completely different way, but we're going to talk about more about fixing those kind of problems later on, because you're going to hear me mention this quite often, and that is that when you're dodging and burning, there are two side effects that just keep popping up all the time. One is that you're making you're making areas lighter or darker, and that gives an illusion that you're actually changing the color of an area, so you get a slight color shift. Now the second problem, the second byproduct of dodging and burning, is that you usually tend to lose some of the contrast, some of the dimension, and you can fix both of those problems in using different methods, and I'm going to go over them later on. So I could also dodge this area. Actually, let's try to dodge that area as well. I'm gonna switch back to my dodge tool, activate my help, quote unquote, and let's gently dodge this area. Now remember what I told you, if you're using your protect tones on something like this, in this case, because this area really wasn't so saturated, it was just darker, we're not getting that much problems. We only see some color shift here, here, and here. But if I deactivate this and now deactivate the protect tones, I can see that now I'm not getting that color shift. So that's how protect tones can be used against you or for you, depending on your knowledge on how to use them and when to use them. And this is a good example. Now the cheek area as opposed to this one. Now that I see the color difference, I can switch back to my help layer and see how that is progressing when we lose the color, which is just a distraction at this point. Alright, this area could definitely use some fixing, and like I said, this area could definitely use some fixing as well, like so. And if you're using your tablet, this is not such intensive work, and if you're using your mouse, well, then you should get a tablet because it's just, I used mouse at the beginning, and I could never imagine myself now switching back to it. It's just too much of a difference. But it doesn't mean that everybody likes mouse less than they like a pen and tablet. Some people swear by mouse for some reason. They even say that they can get used to the pen tool, which is kind of weird because I would thought that it's more natural tool. But I guess they didn't draw as kids, they used mouse to drawing. Or they played video games or something. So okay, now that we have this thing covered, I could definitely work on this area, but I will leave that for some other time. A few more strokes here and there. Let's see. Okay, you see now I could combine possibly both tools, both options, protect and unprotect tones, because first I wanted to even out this area, but now I have a problem, right? I lost some of the dimension, so if I wanted to get back that dimension, I could using the dodge tool, the burn tool, but it would be great if it had protect tones on, which it does, and I'm going to include it here as well. And I'm going to increase the dodge tool here to about 10%. Because what I want to do is I want to dodge this area, but I also want to introduce some color to it. That's why the protect tones in combination with the dodge tool or the burn tool in this case where a minute ago it was a problem, now it's a solution. Now when I'm done with that, actually I'm gonna use the one without the protect tones just for a second here. My setting here for 10% is just too much for this area. Every stroke can be seen. I should have worked at 5%, then I would slowly, gradually build up the color to the point where I can make the subtle effect, but significant one. Alright, now that we have this prepared, let's see before and after. So this was before, this is an after. You can definitely use the dodge and burn tools to work on your images. They're not bad tools, but I believe some of the other methods, the other two, especially the second one, has quite a bit of benefits and it's more flexible. So when we work on an image, I would suggest that you try the other two methods, one of the other two methods. And also you don't have to work on copy of the background layer, because if you take a look, it started from 54 megabytes, and just by using this copy of the background layer, it duplicated, it doubled the size of the file, because it's just duplicating all the pixels all together. And if you're working often using dodge and burn tools, then this duplication in size can create real problems for you. All of a sudden you're working with really huge files, and they're taking up a lot of space. They take a lot of time if you want to send them somewhere over internet, as PSD files. So I would suggest that you use either two curves layer, which is the method I'm going to be discussing, which just uses layer masks, so they're a lot less. And they have a smaller size in the overall document, as well as the dodge and burn method using the gray or the blank layer, which is even better. And we'll go over that in the next video. And let me see if I forgot to show you. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. I have this image here, which I would like to show you one other thing you can do with dodge and burn tools. Now I would like to put a white background on this image, so I would have to mask out her hair, and that's a pretty easy thing to do. And I'm going to use one of those black magic stuff. I'm going to use calculations and channels to mask out this, but because this is not a video on channels and how to use your masks, I'm guessing that you already know that, so this is just going to be how to mask this area and then use dodge and burn tools to correct the mask. So I'll go over to my channels, and let's take a look at the channels. The red one, the green one, and the blue one. Well, we're looking for one that has the biggest contrast between her hair and the background. Now if I take a look at the composite, I can see that the background is actually reddish in color, which means of course that her hair, which is dark, and the red is represented with the brighter color, just like her face. So that means that the red channel has the biggest contrast between the background and her hair. So what we're going to do is going to use this as our base channel to build up the mask. But I could also do one more thing that will improve the contrast, and that is I can combine two red channels using one of the blend modes to increase the contrast even more. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Image and Calculations. Now I already tried this. So what I did is I can choose the different channels here for my source, and I'm going to use the red one. I can choose the red one here for my source number 2, and I can invert those to create black and white mask, and then I can use one of the blend modes for increasing contrast. Now hard mix, that's too much. Pin light, that's pretty good. Linear light, that's not bad. Vivid light, that's good. Hard light, that's also good. Soft light, not bad. Overlay mode kind of brings me the biggest contrast with the biggest amount of detail here. I can see most of the individual lines of hair. So I'm gonna produce that to new channel, and now I'm gonna just work on this mask. I'm gonna use my lasso tool to select this entire area, which I can fix now. I can, because I'm not masking her face, I'm just masking her background, and for that I'm gonna fill this with white. Actually, I think I made it too harsh of a transition, so I'm going to use the feather slider to 50 pixels, and I'm going to select this entire area. So now the transition between this the selected and not selected area is quite soft because of the feather slider, and I'm going to use the same thing. I guess this area I missed. Now as far as this goes, well, I'm going to use my levels by pressing the controller command L. I'll bring up the levels dialog box, and I'm going to click on this tool here, which will let me set the black point. And I'll tell levels that the background is actually black, and I'll tell it that this is white. And this is what I wanted to show you. Now we have a decent looking selection, but we still have some areas that kind of have parts of the background. Well, when you're masking something like this, you have an option now to use some manual tools, and of course this is where dodge and burn tools come in handy. That's what I wanted to show you. If I click on the dodge tool now, and I'm going to increase it here to about 50%, I'll definitely set it to midtones because I want to affect the midtones. That's the only thing that I don't want to see here. Now remember, if you know anything about masking, white reveals, black conceals, right? So gray color it's kind of semi-transparent. We want to get rid of that. So I'm going to use my burn tool, set it to 50%, and I'm going to go over this area. You can see how I didn't affect the individual strands of hair. What I did is just darken that gray area. That's because of the midtones option here, and that's what's so great about this tool. And maybe I can now alt switch or option switch to occasionally to my dodge tool, so I can go back and forth if I miss an area, or if I accidentally go over an area which I want to burn and instead I dodge. So I can always hold my alt key to go back and forth. Let's see, what else can we fix here. Well, I think it's gonna be pretty okay. Now I'm gonna control click on this, or command click on the alpha 1 channel, and that's gonna load up the selection for it. I'll switch to my RGB mode and go back to my layers palette, and now I'll go to this little icon, which will black and white icon, and that will give me the choice to choose between different adjustment layers. Now, unlike adjustment panel, not all of them are not present here, so I have to use adjustment layers from here, and I want to use the solid color, and I want to switch it to white. Of course, in this case I forgot to invert the color, so instead I turn her face and her hair into white, and I want the exact opposite. So I'm gonna select my mask, press Ctrl or Command I. That's gonna switch, and now I have pretty decent looking selection, and I have turned this background into white background, which kind of brings her face and subject more to the viewer's attention, because there's quite a bit of contrast. There's some area here, I guess that was before. So that's how you can also use dodge and burn tools for masking, in case you're wondering. I think this kind of covers pretty much everything you need to know about dodge and burn and sponge tools for this particular method. And there are quite a few other ways you can use these tools, but I'm not going to represent them here in this video or in this whole title. I'm just going to mention them. You can use the dodge and burn tools the same way you would use them on skin, on any material, on any image, whether that be landscape, wildlife photography, wedding photography. It really does not matter. You can use it the same way.